It is truly my pleasure to introduce Elliott Ferguson. He's the president and CEO of our nation's capital destination marketing organization. It's called Destination DC. Now, Elliott is much younger than I am, so he is only a 30-year veteran of the travel and tourism and hospitality industry. He's been at Destination DC since 2001, where he began as VP of Convention Sales, later as Senior VP and of Convention Sales and Services, and finally as President and CEO since 2009. Prior to that, he served in senior group sales positions at powerhouse CVBs in Atlanta and Savannah, Georgia. In February, he finished his 2-year term as National Chair of the U.S. Travel Association. U.S. Travel Association. 2 years. So we might say he really went from the sublime to the ridiculous. From the very best year in the history of tourism in our country to the worst year since the Spanish flu of 1918. Elliott, it's all about building character, isn't it? Elliott serves on many boards, the Smithsonian, the National Zoo, the DC Jazz Festival, United Way, among others. In January of this year, he was named board chair of Tourism Diversity Matters, an organization focused on creating diversity, equity, and inclusion opportunities at all levels of the workforce. He's been a leading voice in advancing conversations about race and racism throughout the hospitality industry, and I am sure he will expand on this role during his presentation. So as someone who has seen Elliott in action, articulating with fervor and conviction the need for a new mindset, a different approach, and a better, more just, and more caring society, it is my pleasure to bring to the stage my friend and colleague, Mr. Elliott Ferguson.
Good morning, everyone. You know, Ms. Summers, it was, there's two people that I've ever heard sing that song, Diana Ross and you. And your version was equally as stirring and a great way to start off this conversation. So you were amazing. I look forward to Googling, learning more about your amazing storied career. So thanks for starting us off this morning. Glenn, your comments were totally on point in terms of what we should be thinking about, and quite frankly, having those conversations that are important, lessons that we've learned and things in which I'll be talking about. So thank you for that. And Jorge, needless to say, you know, you're my hero. You're amazing. You're a great asset to this industry. So to the AV team, I do vacillate between here and here, so I apologize in advance, and I'll try to move slowly so you'll know when that's going to happen. So today I'm going to be talking about two uniquely juxtaposition things. One, how to promote and sell a destination in the midst of disaster and unfortunate circumstances. And then we'll end in talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the importance of that in so many ways, some of the things in which Glenn talked about earlier. Now here's the irony. This has absolutely nothing to do with what I would normally talk about in terms of promoting our destination. Who goes out and says, you know, these are the things that makes it difficult to sell Washington or any city. But equally at the same time, it's important to have these conversations and also to focus on these things. I did this about 6 years ago about 5.5 years ago in London. And just to set the stage, it was the night of the election for the 45th president. And I'm getting on a plane that night in Washington, D.C., and I'm sitting next to a whole bunch of people that were flying. And no matter what your position was on our 45th president, we all had an opinion. And the pilot said to us, well, when we land in London, we'll know who the next president of the United States will be. And so I pretty much felt comfortable in my thought as to who would win. And we landed. And, you know, if you've ever been on a plane, I'm sure all of you have, what happens when the plane lands? All the men get up right away like we're going somewhere and get our stuff out, and then we wait for like 10 minutes, and everyone else is sitting there like, what are these jackasses doing? So we hear who the president's going to be, and we sit, and we look at each other, and we all ponder, you know, the essence of what's happening in America and what will happen moving forward, which none of us knew. I was flying to London to speak at a conference on how to promote our destinations in the brink of international disasters and negative circumstances. So I was there with the person that does what I do in various countries. They're the secretary of, or they have these powerful titles. One was from Greece, and they were talking about the economic downturn. I was talking about 9/11, and we were all talking about various things. And two things happened. One, I'm walking to this conference and I'm thinking about what I'm going to speak on. And then two, I get there and there were like 9 name tags in front of me. And I just kind of walk up to the area and I just look at the name tags and I look at the folks and I smile because I'm in hospitality. And the woman that was standing behind the counter says, "Welcome, what are you here for?" And I said, "Well, I'm here for this conference." And she says, "Well, I don't see your name tag." Now, she didn't ask me my name. She knew nothing about me. And I just smiled because I wasn't wearing a mask. And I folded my arms, which my wife will tell you is a posture when I'm a little annoyed. Now, mind you, all the things that just happened in terms of the election, my thoughts on that. And I said, "Well, what's my name?" And she says, "Well, I don't know, but I don't see your name tag." And I looked at her and I picked up my name tag and I put it on. And she said to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for an Irish or a Scottish guy." And I just smiled at her and I said, "Well, surprise." It was one of those moments whereas, she made assumptions because of color of skin, because of name. My name couldn't possibly be Elliott Ferguson, which is a Scottish and Irish name. But it also happened to be my name. But the thing that really stood out is that she never even asked. She just automatically assumed. And we'll end on that conversation, but it kind of juxtapositions what we're talking about today. Me getting on stage, talking about disasters, and kind of calling that woman out while I was on the panel about things in which we've had to deal with, and then also how I felt inside when I really wanted to say something probably a little more terse towards this woman, but I smiled and I just kind of played it off a little bit and I went on with my day. So talking about this today is really defining for so many reasons, and I'll share with you a little bit more. Now, I'm supposed to start off by talking about Washington, so a quick commercial, and then we'll go on and I'll talk a little bit more.
That place is Washington, but you haven't experienced D.C. We are the capital of these United States and proud of it, but we're also the capital of that beat of the last call half smoked. With more museums per square mile than any place in the country, these monuments will change you. But this city is no postcard. We're the capital of food, art, music, and don't stop now. There's more to see. You know Washington. Now experience DC.
Now, I wanted to share that with you, one, because when we talk about DEI, one thing I'll say about me as a leader in this industry, there's 700 DMOs, there's 9 people that look like me that run DMOs. Not a very large number of black people that run DMOs. Arguably, I've always been that person that said that I want to make sure that there's diversity in everything that we do in terms of marketing our city. For goodness sakes, I market a city that was known as Chocolate City, or that still is known as Chocolate City. So there is a sense that I am going to look at things through a different lens. I also look at some of the things in which we sell against on a regular basis, like who wants to go to a city for monuments, memorials, and museums? That's boring, that's dull. A lot of people might say contrary, but more people want to come and go to the beaches here in Palm Beach and other places. But because of that, we sell against the perception of DC as a destination in so many different ways, and that's something in which I focus on. One of the things I say in our marketing is that, yes, I want to see monuments, memorials, and museums to a certain extent, but I really want to showcase the flavor of Washington as a destination. A city that has 186 embassies representing 186 countries, representing 186 cultures. Similar to here, when you see a black person, you can't automatically assume that they're African American because they could be African Haitian, they could be African whatever, or black from another country, and the same, and so on with other ethnicities. So that was a huge part of what I brought to the table when I became CEO in 2008, 2009, which was a very difficult time simply because of the economic downturn. And I've had 2 major disruptors in my career that are defining moments for me. The first was 9/11, and ironically, as Jorge said, I moved to DC in December 2001. Whereas everyone, including my mom, was scratching her head and saying, why are you moving there? It's not going to be safe. It's a target. Look what just happened. And everyone was thinking, how hard would it be to sell a city like Washington? But it was defining for me because it really gave me a chance to really think about the opportunities or the way in which I've gotten comfortable in my time in Atlanta and the things that I allowed to happen to me. And I don't mean in a negative way, because it was on me in terms of saying, it's okay, I'll move forward. I'll let it go. Similar to what I did with the woman in London. And I kind of woke up that next morning and said, I'm resigning next week. No job, no nothing. I'm resigning. And I went to the office and I said to the CEO that I'm resigning. He asked me, where was I going? I don't know. But it's time for me to make some changes for myself. And I'll talk about a little bit more what happened after that and why that was important. The other was last year when we all watched what was happening in America while we were all dealing with COVID and still dealing with COVID. Whereas I sat back and I said to myself, you know, there are 9 people that do what I do. I'm chairman of the U.S. Travel Association, the first black chair they ever had, sadly. An organization that is very powerful in our industry, and this is an opportunity for me to really be defining in so many different ways. Yes, I got to focus on economics. I got to focus on international visitors coming to the city. I've got to look at what's happening within U.S. Travel Association to make sure we're making the right decisions and challenge them. Because if it's only been one type of leader for all those years, just imagine what, as Glenn said, what did not happen in terms of having a voice that was more diverse. So these were my agenda items before COVID, and then of course what happened last year with, I will say the murder of George Floyd, but also thinking about so many that were not recorded for so many years, so many stories my grandparents told me that I had to deal with. So my aha moment or wake-up call was not to resign, but to say, well, I'm going to use my voice and use this opportunity to make sure that this is a topic that's really important to me. But at the same time, focusing on all the disruptors in which we've had to deal with during that time frame. So as I talk about that later, you know, I do want to talk to you about disruptors because that's what this is all about. And in Washington, D.C., you know, 9/11 arguably was the first. I would say before then there were other things that caused folks to look at D.C. through a different lens. And with politics from a global perspective, if it happens in America, it happens in Washington, D.C. So perhaps not in the United States, but globally people say, oh, I don't want to go to Washington because I don't like this, or I don't want to go to Washington because it's not safe because of the shootings that the terrorism that happened in Paris. So D.C. is a target. So we've had tons of disruptors that have continued to focus on, that continue to plague us and to challenge us as we focus on marketing our city. Something that you all hear about on a regular basis, and you probably scratch your head and say, why does the government shut down? Trust me, so do we in D.C. For D.C., what that means is that people actually just think about I-95, which is a primary route coming north or south into Palm Beach. There was a perception that, well, we can't come to Washington because everything's shut down when the government shuts down. So I'm like literally had an ad with a padlock across the major arteries coming into the city saying, contrary to this perception, DC is still open. But globally, it doesn't matter. You know, people think that when the government shut down, because we're a government town, that's the perception that there's nothing to see and do in Washington. So similar to what was referenced earlier in terms of average daily room rate and occupancy, we automatically see a negative reaction, whereas people are not coming to our city. So we've got to react to that. Whereas nationally, just like I did before I moved to DC, I'm like, I don't understand how in the U.S., the world's most powerful city, the government shuts down. What does it mean? This is politics. This is crazy. Just move on. But in D.C., it means literally things stop happening. Tourists stop coming to the city. Convention groups start calling and saying, well, should we come? Is the airport open? And this happened 4 times in the time in which I was a CEO. So then comes this campaign called DC is Open for Business. And the reason why I'm sharing all this with you is because as we talk about COVID, I'm like, we're the experts on dealing with disruptors because we've had so many. So we had a huge campaign that was talking about is DC open for business and focusing on what there is to see and do in Washington. My budget is about $30 million. That's not a lot of money. There's no state tourism organization like Visit Florida. So the buck stops with me. And so therefore, as I'm saying to stakeholders who think, well, you don't have to promote DC because everybody wants to come to DC. I'm saying on the contrary, in addition to the reasons why people think we're a dull, boring government town, now we have to deal with the perception of DC as being closed. And no matter what we did, it resonated to a certain extent, but we became experts at this because we had 4 scenarios where the city shut down, and we had to deal with that. Safety and security, I've been dealing with that for a long time. In the 80s, DC was called the murder capital of the world. Globally, if I'm outside of the US promoting DC, the first question that someone will ask is DC safe? Aren't you all the murder capital of the world? I love going to the UK and going to Australia because the shock value of dealing with any of the media. They could sit there, they could smile like you guys did and welcome me and be nice and friendly. And then as soon as the camera comes on, isn't DC the murder capital of the world? How do you sell that place? And that's kind of what they do. They go for shock value. And so we deal with it on a regular basis, and we have to focus on it through a different lens. Just like you all now, the next component is safety tied to people coming because of the pandemic. We hope that we won't go back into a shutdown mode, but as we deal with that, we have to make sure that folks know what our protocol is in terms of safety, in terms of coming into our city. Right now, like so many cities, we're experiencing crime at an extraordinary level, unfortunately, gun violence. And that resonates. And as you really look at this as a problem, it has been a problem for a long time. It's just mass shootings that get national exposure and international exposure. But if you aggregate all the gun violence throughout the year in the US, and they got that number and shared it, coming to the United States would not necessarily feel like a place that you'd want to come. And it all starts, unfortunately, with Washington, D.C., because globally, every single day in the world, someone is listening to someone that's talking about safety in America from Washington, D.C., because, of course, we're the seat of the federal government. In Washington, I'm sure someone will count, I believe there's like 19 federal organizations that are tied to safety. 19. How many are in the 39 cities in Palm Beach? I guess there would be 39 police captains and police departments. But in a city like Washington with only 700,000 people, 20 by 20 by 20 by 20, that's how many policing agencies we have. So when we talk about safety and we share this data with them, it resonates in a different way. Now, granted, it does not mean that something won't happen in Washington, D.C., because we know that it has. We know that we are a reactive society versus a proactive society, so this data is extremely important to share with individuals, especially groups that are coming into the city. It's comforting to know that they exist, but it's scary when you think about if they talk to each other. That is another component. Does the Metro Police Department talk to the Park Service Police Department? Is there communication there? We play an active role in this scenario, especially when we're dealing with disasters, because it's extremely important that we know what's going on. We know who's in town that does not live in Washington, and we're sharing that information with folks on a regular basis. January 6th and inauguration in Washington, D.C. We were feeling comfortable in saying that no matter what was going in the U.S., in the U.S. and in Washington, D.C., that we were going to finally see people come back to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration on January the 20th. And then January 6th happened, which we all remember, but we'll remember it for different reasons. Because we didn't lose business, because there was no business. But again, Washington, D.C., the global community watching a ton of people go into the Capitol building, which I live 12 blocks from, and see what was happening on TV, unfolding. My office is in Chinatown. Our offices are shut down, but I'm in the office every day. I'm sitting there talking to someone, my phone's just buzzing, which is never a good sign when it buzzed that much. And I finally looked at it because I was talking to someone in the office, and I realized what was going on. Here's the irony. My wife and I, we live in a row house on Capitol Hill. We're renovating it. We're living in a hotel. Guess who was staying in those hotels? Those folks. I've got a cute little ferocious 6-pound Rottweiler. Okay, no, he's a terrier. He thinks he's a Rottweiler. I'm walking the dog at 5:30 in the morning on the 5th, in the evening on the 5th, and the morning on the 6th. Guess who's petting my dog? And I mean, these are people staying in a hotel. I'm looking at the news watching the news on the 6th. My cousin, who's a Secret Service agent, calls me and says, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm in my office." He says, "You might want to get back to your hotel." I'm like, "Get back to my hotel where they're staying?" But I had no option because my house is a shell. And I'm looking at everything unfolding, and I'm watching, folks from around the globe are calling, "Are you guys safe? Is everything all right?" The good news was that my people were at home for the most part. I was the only person in the office minus another individual. I watched the news that night, and I see the guy whose feet were, there are certain ones that stand out, the guy with the paint and everything, and the guy whose feet were on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Guess who was staying in my hotel? The guy whose feet was on Nancy Pelosi's desk, and he pet my dog that morning. And I didn't, you kind of say, well, nah, that couldn't be him. No, it couldn't be him. That morning, the next morning, the GM comes and says, the Secret Service came looking for that guy. And I'm like, it was him. And, I'm thinking about the dynamics of who's staying in our hotels, and the fact, to a certain extent, I was happy that we saw people staying in hotels, but then to see what happened that day and to be a part of it staying in a hotel was just such a surreal moment. Realizing that the guy that they carried off, when they finally caught him because he went back home and was trying to hide and they got him, was the guy that was kind and asked me what kind of dog it was and pet my dog that morning. But what do you think the global community is saying? They're saying America's not safe, America's not ready, America's not prepared. Those agencies that I showed you on this, where were they? All these different variables. And forget the politics of it all, but that's what I'm thinking about as a guy that sells a DMO. And then all of a sudden, the inaugural dollars that we thought we were going to get were all gone. So we were in a shutdown mode for longer. Haven't traveled internationally, but I guarantee you, as soon as I get back out there and I meet with a reporter from London, what do you think they're going to say? Where were you? What was it like? Did you feel uncomfortable? And these are things in which we deal with all the time. And look at the headlines: stay out of Washington, D.C. And that happens on a regular basis, unfortunately, in our city. Right now, with the gun violence that is sad and happening nationwide, that is the reality. It's happening nationwide, not just in Washington, D.C. But as a destination, we're constantly concerned about it. I'm sure the 39 cities here and the 39 mayors are also concerned about it and the perception of gun violence and what is going to happen and how are we going to finally deal with this in a way that gets us beyond where we are. This is something that is really, really concerning to us as citizens, but also from the standpoint of folks visiting our cities. Sadly, the reality with most gun violence is that it happens in places where people know people, in neighborhoods, but not where tourists are visiting. And that's not something that we're proud of, but that's just the reality. But what happens when it's a tourist that gets killed? And that's something in which we're all having to deal with as we're talking about how great our destinations are and how wonderful we are as a city. Glenn referenced the economic negative downturn or how it impacted your city. Our numbers are pretty compelling in terms of what happened in Washington, D.C. I went from a 90-person organization to about 60, which is much better than most other cities. And then the economic impact continued to be faced, that we continued to face a negative economic impact, which we still do. Right now, you see folks coming into the city on the weekends, but we have no group business. The data tells us that destinations that have beaches are eating the lunch of all other destinations. So Jorge and the other 39, congratulations. I know that for a fact. I was just up in Amelia Island with the CEO of Brand USA, who used to run Visit Florida, and the Ritz-Carlton selling at $1,600 a night. In Washington, D.C., we rely heavily on convention business, which is not happening. We had our first convention last week, major citywide, with 20,000 people. Otakon, if you've ever seen it, everyone's dressed up in costumes and stuff like that, and we were happy to have them. Better than anything that we've seen in 19 months, which was nothing. We have no group business for the most part. We have no business travel. Congress is not allowing meetings to take place in person. So where do you think most of the business travel comes from? It's tied to Congress physically being open. So that's not happening. So we rely heavily on weekend business right now, which is good, but not as good as what you all are facing here in the greater Palm Beach area. So something in which we're focusing on and things in which we thought we would see moving in the right direction. Every morning we turn on the TV, Jorge, I know you feel the same way, and we're like, okay, what are we going to hear? What did we hear this morning? People are canceling airline flights and rethinking their travel. The families that are on TV saying that they're not coming. So now we went from a destination that solely focuses on promoting our destination to a destination that is tied to people getting vaccinated and wearing a mask and talking about all the key things that are tied to coming into our city. Our mayor just announced that city employees must show that they're vaccinated and prove they're vaccinated before they can come in to the city and come back to work. That's going to continue to resonate. Before you can get on a plane, I guarantee you, I think, that if you're flying domestically, they're going to have an expectation that you're vaccinated. That's going to become more and more the norm and more important for us to play a huge role in making sure that people are vaccinated so we can get back to normal. Which is when you go to Washington.org, in addition to all the reasons why I want you to come to our city, you'll see all the information on getting vaccinated in DC, plus ways in which you can get vaccinated if you're visiting from Palm Beach to come to Washington, DC. The other part of it is to get people to understand that it takes about 5 weeks before you're actually able to travel. So if you think you're going to wait until there's an emergency, unless you get Johnson & Johnson and you still have to wait until you're immune or until it kicks in, you're really hurting yourself in the long run, plus the fact that we know that 99% of the people that are in hospitals right now are those that are not vaccinated, which is a big thing. And then as we talk about selling our destinations and what Glenn referenced earlier and why you all are having this, which I applaud what you're doing, I go back to my time as chair of U.S. Travel Association and a conversation I had with the CEO, Roger Dow, a guy that I respect a lot. He's done a great deal for this organization, for the U.S. Travel Association and our industry. And so there's Roger and I, and this uncomfortable moment of, Roger, I want to do more tied to making this a priority. I said, I realize that the U.S. Travel Association is not the organization that is perceived as the most diverse. And I'm now your chair. And one thing that Jorge and I will tell you all, and probably a lot of others about chairs, is that if you're lucky as the CEO, we work hard to find the person that we want to be the chair, and we hope that the board puts that person in that role. So I'm assuming through the process that U.S. Traveler went through, they looked at the dynamics of never having diversity in that role. They heard my voice after I went to the first meeting 9 years earlier, and we were in San Diego, and they were all happy about the meeting, and they said, what do you think? I said, well, I think it's good, but, anytime there's the but, I'm one of 2 black people in the room. There are like 3 women in the room. I said, so this organization lacks diversity. I said, we're here, and Mitt Romney's running against President Obama. President Obama has done amazing things for our industry. And I said, and I'm not saying this because he happens to look like me. I said, but when you think about what he's done in terms of Travel Tourism Advisory Board, which is commerce, making sure that the visa process for folks coming into America is easier, and I went on and on and on. And I said, now I know Mitt Romney is a great candidate. I said, I know that he is the godson of Willard Marriott, so I know he won't forget our industry. I said, but what you all are doing is you're talking about why Mitt Romney would be a great president, but you're not sharing the opportunities tied to both, which is what I expect from the U.S. Travel Association. Don't sell me on why this one person would be president. And if it was all about Obama, I would have said the same thing about Mitt Romney. I said, I would assume that you all would have come up with something that was tied to how each of these individuals and their agendas would be good for our industry. But all I heard is about Mitt Romney. And they were mad. We're sitting on the beach eating oysters, having a great time watching the Olympics. It was beautiful, San Diego. And I was told, yeah, you ruffled some feathers. I'm like, sorry, ask me a question. I'm going to kind of give you the answer that I feel is right. And then later on, I started seeing changes, and I became more actively involved because I started seeing those changes, and I started being more and more vocal in a right way in terms of what needed to happen within this organization. And then I'm chair. I'm in this role, and we want to manage our chairs as best. Is your chair in here, Jorge, before I make any more comments? Okay, good. We want to manage our chairs as best we possibly can. Edit this part in the video if it's in there. So, Elliott, this is the agenda that we want for you. And I'm like, that's nice. Let me tell you what is important to me. And let me tell you what I want to focus on. And, like, oh, well, we want, okay, well, we can do this, but we want, I'm like, no, this is how this is going to happen. I want state tourism organizations more involved. Let's talk about these shows. Then what happened last year happened, and my call to Roger, I want to do something that's impactful from this industry's perspective to talk about racial injustice in America. And at the time, it was really about understanding the Black Lives Matter movement and understanding how it's so different from DEI, and they're two different conversations, but equally important. And the reaction is, well, I'm like, I hear you, but this is what we're going to do. We had 2,500 people on the first Zoom, 2,500. I had folks come on the Zoom I moderated, and I said, I handpicked the people that I wanted to come on, and they were all people that looked like me the first time. And I said, I want you all to not just skirt the issue in terms of why it's important and all these other things. I want you to dig deeper and talk about your experiences in terms of your skin. I said, because if we really want to do better, we're going to have to talk about this and be more impactful and make people uncomfortable, because we all know it's an uncomfortable conversation. And I said, and this is hard, because this is what I was taught as a Black person, coming from grandparents who didn't have kids until they were in their 40s. They were married for 25 years. My grandma never got pregnant, then she got pregnant. And so therefore, in 1945, they had my mom. But they had a lot of living before then. My parents were younger. By the time my mom was 21, she and my dad had 3 kids. We grew up in California. I'd visit my grandparents in Georgia. I'd visit my grandparents in Nassau, Bahamas, who also lived in Miami and Liberty City, and I'd get different lessons. And my grandparents in Georgia would tell me about these things that, how do you manage and work in white America? My grandma was a domestic for a family that she loved. If you ever saw the movie The Help, my wife is like, stop crying. I'm like, that's my grandma. This is her life, these people she loved, and this is what I heard. But I'm this kid from the West Coast trying to understand all these dynamics, and now I have this moment to really talk about this on this stage and make sure that people understand. So I said to Ernie Wooden, who just retired as a CEO of the LA Convention Bureau, that Jorge, you probably worked with him in Hilton, has done extremely well, was just honored by the US Travel Association. I said, Ernie, I want you to be on this panel, but I want you to tell a story about something that no one knows about you. Ernie is a soft-spoken man. He's about 6'3". He has done extraordinarily well financially. His daughter married Bob Johnson, the former CEO of BET, billionaire. So his daughter married well. He's done well. And I said, and then Ernie started telling a story about when he was 7 years old in Brooklyn. He was playing with some kids, and the police came and slammed him to the ground because they were looking for a Black man. He was 7 years old. So if you have kids, I want you to think about your 7-year-old being slammed to the ground and it being okay with the police to do that, and his parents could do nothing about it, just because. I said, Ernie, you got to lead with that story, because nobody knows this about Ernie. Then Ernie started talking about when he was at Hilton, how when he was senior leadership, he came into the office, there were certain people that did not want him sitting in the senior leadership's office. They want him to sit with the secretarial pool. And then story after story about how he was marginalized because of the color of his skin. And I said to Ernie, here's a very uncomfortable comment. I said, you're a comfortable Black guy to most white people. You speak in a way that they feel comfortable with, you look a way that that makes them comfortable, and you have done well. I said, what happens, Ernie, if you walk down, and Ernie lives in an extremely nice neighborhood in LA. He says, what happens when you walk down the street at night? He says, I told my son a long time ago that we live here, but at night, we're just a Black person that is dark, and all of a sudden we're a threat, and don't you ever forget that. I said, you've got to say that on screen. I said, because the shock value is getting individuals in the audience to understand who you are, who you really are. Because I love when people come to me and say, well, I've got lots of Black friends. I'm like, great, because so do I. And I say it facetiously, or I have a lot of Latinx friends. I'm like, cool, I do too. I said, there's a difference between knowing Latin people and being friends with Latin people. I said, so I challenge you to ask your friends that don't look like you some hard questions about what it was like growing up. Because the people you know, they are a certain way when they're in your environment because this is the way they are supposed to be. But when the Latinx community comes together, it's a totally different party. Or when black people come together with only black people, it's a totally different party. And I'm like, you need to understand that when you make these comments about all these people that you know and they're your friends. I said, because yeah, we're friendly, but we're not always friends. And I said, you have to understand that dynamic if you truly want this conversation to resonate in a positive way. And then you think about our industry, hospitality. What is that all about? We're supposed to be the most welcoming, all those things tied to making sure that everyone feels comfortable. But let's just face it, that's not necessarily true. Perhaps if you come to Washington, D.C., you would think that's true. But I can tell you a lot of times that I've gone into environments and I was asked, a question as if I was a part of the staff. Or, one time, some of you have heard this before, I went to a black tie event in Washington, D.C., and a guy got out of his really nice Porsche and threw me his keys because I had on a tuxedo and I was going to the same event. But he didn't even look at me. He just threw me his keys. Well, you don't even get a tag for that? I mean, is that how it works? Wow, I wait for a tag. I want to know. I want to write my name down. I'll take your picture. He threw me his keys. And I went down to this event with this guy. And I purposely made sure that I was around this guy. And when he left, sadly, I threw his keys in the trash. I was so mad. I'm like, no, this is not going to end well for him. So at the end of the event, we're in the lobby where you wait for your car. I didn't have my car because I work a couple blocks away. And I stood next to this guy as he was, I gave my key to a bellman. No, he didn't. But what he saw was the color of my skin and a tuxedo, which I don't see bellmen dressed in tuxedos, I digress. But that's what he saw. And I tell that story because I want people to understand. I need to be comfortable making people uncomfortable and understanding that when I'm up here on stage and I'm talking, this is who you all know, but at the same time, there are a lot of biases and other things that exist that we all have, and we have to have these conversations about racial injustice. This quote, not just because it was Dr. King, but simply because it resonates today more than ever. In the end, we'll remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Those that listen and are engaged and are in situations where we hear stuff that we know that we may not agree with or we're uncomfortable with, but we don't say anything about it. I call it the Billy Bush effect. Anyone remember the Billy Bush scandal? He on a bus with our former president, and the president was making inappropriate comments about women. If you remember that, raise your hand. If you don't, so they were having conversations, and the president was making comments, not president at the time, that were not necessarily flattering in terms of what he would do to women. And Billy Bush was just laughing and doing the things in which he normally would do. Billy Bush lost his job. The other person went on to become president of the United States. And I think about that simply because how many times was I Billy Bush? I'm formerly military. I was taught, like most of us, wait your turn, don't ruffle feathers, work hard, and then one day you'll retire and you'll have all these amazing things happen at the end. But again, last year was my wake-up call. So now, when I hear things that are inappropriate, I'm not going to throw wine in your face or anything like that. But now I challenge people, are you comfortable in challenging the senior leadership when they say something wrong? My wife works in our industry, and she tells a story of standing with her some colleagues at a national event. She's over international sales for the entire company, Kimpton Hotels. I'm very proud of her. She's in the room now, probably on her 12th Zoom. And the CEO walked up, and because there were 3 or 4 black people, and said, is this an NAACP convention? Well, what did they do? They just kind of took a deep breath inside and said nothing. This was prior to. I said, the lesson that she's learned moving forward is to say something. It's not acceptable. It's not okay for someone to make a comment like that, even because they think it's funny and it's a joke or whatever, but they need to understand how inappropriate that comment was. So now, because she and I have been talking a lot and dealing with this conversation, she now leads an effort with the CEO tied to this exact topic, an exact subject? Why is she the only one of a few females that are in leadership within this company? Why is she the only black person? Why are they not looking at the different group? Now, and Kempton can be considered a very hip company. You know, they're very LGBTQ friendly, they're very friendly in a lot of ways. But again, you could have all these things on the surface, but you can have people working for you that don't believe at all in the culture because of comments like that from the top. So the question is, if you're in a group of people that look like you, and you hear something like that said, what will you do and how will you respond moving forward? Because it's a really defining moment and it says a lot about you as an individual. I know how I will respond. I probably won't throw wine in your face. I probably won't do the things, but I remember several times, especially in the military, where that happened. Whereas if I had said something, I would have not had a job. You know, when I was 20 some odd years old and that happened, I would not have had a job. So part of the conversation now is empowering younger people to talk about this in a way that is more impactful and make sure folks know that it's not okay. Within this industry that I love, I've been in it for over 30 years now, same thing happened. After last year, what normally happens, women come together, they talk about things in which they think are important to them so that they can have conversations. Well, that's what 7 black males did. We all came together and we talked about what was happening in America. And we talked about the industry we love. And we talked about how we need to do more. How last year was a wake-up call for us in terms of, yes, I'm the CEO and I'm this and I'm that. I said, but that's not enough. I have been empowered with this position through the grace of God to be able to have a voice and make sure that voice is heard. So then we said, well, we need to be more impactful in terms of what we do in a way that's not just a moment, but actually has an opportunity to move this along. Because I won't be chair for long, and we all know what happens with specific efforts. They start off strong, and then the leadership leaves, and then they die down. Then something happens later, and then we start up again, similar to what's happening with the pandemic. We forget, and then we get comfortable, and then all of a sudden we're dealing with it again. We literally just did in the last 6 months, whereas we stopped wearing masks, and now people don't want to wear masks again, even though they know what's happening in America and globally. So the first thing we did was we did an open letter to the industry, which we can share with you, that basically said, dear industry, we love you. You guys are important to us. But here are some of the things in which we've all experienced and how we challenge you all to do better. You know, you guys are doing it by having this summit, by having folks come in and talk about so many key issues, but also, you know, and making sure that we have these conversations. And then we thought about the letter and, you know, we got all this great feedback. People, oh, that was great, that was wonderful. But when people say that to me, I'm like, well, tell me what was wonderful about it to you. I'm like, no. And I'm not challenging you in a way to be combative, but I'm really curious as to what you've learned. What are you thinking about what's happening to the Asian community right now in America? What's your reaction to it? How does that parlay into how you promote your destination or your hotel or what have you? And as we had these conversations, then we said, well, we need to go a step further. So similar to what the former CEO of LA, Ernie Wooden, talked about earlier, I said, we need to do something, we need to do a video. And the guy that started all this was the CEO of Visit Baltimore, Al Hutchinson, who's in the far left corner. And he started by saying, we need to get on a call and have a conversation. And then the idea started going from there. So mine was, let's do a video. I do all creative in-house. My team will love to do this. They didn't really love to do it, but they loved it after the fact. I just said, hey, guess what? In addition to everything else you're doing, we're now doing this. We did a video that was 8 minutes and 46 seconds long, talking about what it was like being black in this industry. And, you know, there was a lot of, and it's not about, we're not giving each other high fives and saying, okay, that was great. But this was really an opportunity for us to really get those folks that we've known for years to have impactful conversations about this subject. We did webinars, as I said, with U.S. Travel Association, and later I became chair of Tourism Diversity Matters, which I'll talk about later, and of course DI, Destinations International, which is the Association for Convention Bureaus. We just had our convention 2 weeks ago in Baltimore. There's a specific effort that they're doing. I just received an award. My team put that on there. If I saw it, I would have told them not to put it on there. That was tied to what our efforts are in this particular area. But then I gave everybody homework. So every time we did these conversations, I was like, before you get on a Zoom, before you have these conversations with your teams, watch this video on systemic racism. It's short, it's animated. All of us will pay attention to it, but it really ties to why Black America is economically and in other ways where it is today. As we look at the dynamics of the Black community and we have opinions about it from an educational perspective, from an economic perspective, and it really talks about, when people say to me, well, slavery was in 1865, that was 155 years ago, let it go. I'm like, I said, but let's talk about what's happened throughout the years and the decades leading up to 2021 and still exist. And the defining moment for them is that I had no idea, which is exactly what this is all about. And then, of course, the uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. If you've never seen that, write it down and Google and go to YouTube and pay attention to what this gentleman has done in terms of having conversations with people that did not look like him and talking about the things they don't know. I think the first person, he's a former NFL player. He interviewed Matthew McConaughey. Everybody, it's great when we have recognized names, have these conversations. And it just went on and on and on from there in terms of defining moments in terms of talking about this important subject, because it is important. There were a lot of things in which were done that all of a sudden I go from the DMO guy, which I still am, I love selling my destination, to really being a voice in this space because I'm chair of the U.S. Travel Association. So from the top right, the article with me leaning over the Black Lives Matter Plaza, which our mayor did and other cities created as well. To the right below that was the presentation I did with Ernie Wooden in the top left corner. Michelle Mason, you don't see her face. She's the new CEO of American Society of Association Executives. Black female, an organization that has never had, the question is, before last year, would capable people be given these opportunities if they weren't white in America? And this is not a slam on white America, but this is a reality check in terms of where we are as an industry and as an organization, as a nation. DEI, extremely important. As I talked about earlier, we talk about Black Lives Matter, we talk about the Black community, and I see that it's separate from DEI. Why? Simply because the dynamics tied to the Black community in America are uniquely different. I don't need to go into detail. You guys know what I'm talking about. If you don't, Google it, get caught up. It's a lot of things, 400 plus years tied to, 500 plus years tied to that experience. But then you start looking at all the other groups that have been marginalized, Native Americans, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA, Asian community, and the list goes on and on, Latinx communities. And then we start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as Glenn said earlier, it's like, what does your staff look like? Who's influencing your marketing? In the 60s, it was a whole bunch of males that happened to be white that were talking about products that they were promoting to women. How narrow-minded is that? Perhaps okay for the time, but not for this time. So who's looking at your marketing to tell you, you might want to take that out because it might be exclusionary or it might be whatever. There was an ad that I saw for a state, which I will not name, that said, come to our state, we're not for everyone. And I was on a state panel for state of Colorado. They asked me to do something similar to this for the whole state. And they talked about that ad. Now, the person that did it probably did not mean what it said. But what does it mean to you if you're looking at an ad for a state that is 90+% white? Don't start doing the math. You can probably Google it and figure out which state it was. And see that they don't have a lot of diversity, and their advertising is saying that we're not for everyone. What they mean is that they're an adventure town, adventure state, outdoor activities, blah, blah, blah. If that's not what you want, but what it resonated as was one-dimensional and narrow-minded, simply because they didn't have people at the table helping them to make the right decisions to say, that might not be good. Because one day there's going to be a guy in Palm Beach talking about how stupid that ad was. And voila, I'm here. So from the standpoint of your marketing, from the standpoint of your board of directors, from the standpoint of your team, how you promote your membership, all these things, you have to continue to challenge them. Because as this quote says so well, and I remember seeing it in a commercial just a couple nights ago, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And I think about the Michelle Masons, who's now the CEO of American Society of Association Executives. Would she have been considered before? Or would she have been given the job as the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which is an important job, but only important if that person has access to the people making the decisions. There's one thing to check a box in terms of your marketing and advertising, and there's another thing to really be holistic in terms of your approach and marketing your destination. And really looking at people, because how many times I was just having breakfast last week with the former chairman of our airports authority, very accomplished black man. He came in a suit and a bow tie, and we were sitting across from each other, and I'd just come from the gym, but I went to the office, took a shower, but I was dressed similar to this. Very comfortable. It's 90 some odd degrees and humid, for God's sakes. I'm not wearing a suit. So he sits across from me and he's telling me about the new concourse at Reagan National that had just opened. And we were talking about so many different things, but he talked about this one guy who showed up and he had jeans, flip-flops, painted fingernails, and he had twists in his hair, and he's a black kid. But he went to Stanford, which is where this guy went. He graduated at the top of his class. He was the smartest person in the room. And he was saying how he just could not understand why this guy came dressed like this. And I laughed at him. I smiled. He says, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "You're a dinosaur." I said, "Here's the reality." I said, "There have been several times in my career where I saw a person that looked like me, maybe 20 years ago, that had locks. And I'm like, man, why are you doing that? It's hard enough being black. Why would you do that?" That's how we talk to each other in our community. And that's how I was taught. Do everything you can to fit in. Always wear a suit. Always, always. Because if you don't, you won't be taken seriously. Now I have to unlearn some of that. Because what you learn now is that the generations that are coming in after us, which outnumber us, are now coming in with different expectations. They weren't taught, work hard and then you retire and then you can live your life. Because, hell, you might not be able to retire. You might die at 40. But they want work-life balance now. And for those of us who are 55 plus, like myself, and if we have these antiquated ways of thinking, they're not going to want to work for us. So I went through this conversation. I had this conversation with him about, he's an attorney. I said, if I came into your law firm and I saw all of you guys dressed like this, 20 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, I want to do business with them. They have diversity, blah, blah, blah. But today, I'm going to look at you all and say, maybe you don't represent who I am as a person. Because I love flavor. I love, if someone is coming in, a tech company, they're going to look at that guy and they're going to know he's the smartest person in the room and they're going to feel comfortable in knowing that you're all welcoming and all encompassing. Perhaps not wear jeans with holes in it to work and flip-flops, but the individualism of that person. So I challenged him. I said, call that guy as you sat there and dissected why he came dressed like that when everyone else was dressed similar to you, and ask him, what does he think of you? He said, I never thought about that. I said, yeah, you should do that. I said, he respects you because he knows that you're 2 generations removed, but you went to Stanford, you had all these great opportunities, and you're really smart. I said, but he probably will say, with all due respect, bruh, I wouldn't want to work for you because your culture is not who I am. And I said, and what you're doing is you're limiting your opportunity to work with a more diverse group of people because the younger groups, the younger organizations, the Apples, the Amazons of the world, they want people that are cooler, that look like them, that all these things that we talk about. And I said, these things are important as you move forward and you're looking at making sure you have diversity in your organization. So when I started off in this industry in Savannah, Georgia, as Jorge referenced, this was in the 80s. I'm a California kid, and I moved there because one of my grandparents was getting ill. And I remember the dynamics of downtown Savannah. You guys been to Savannah? Well, in the 80s, it looked just the same because it's a historic district. It's grown a lot. But there were these blue-haired women and very well-meaning men that wanted nothing to change about downtown Savannah. Nothing. We want to keep it the same. Arguably, yeah. I mean, the buildings aren't going to change. They're historic buildings. But what they were saying is that they don't want outsiders coming in. And how many of you have heard of Savannah College of Art and Design, SCAD? probably one of the most recognized art schools globally today. They were just starting out, and I remember working with the Rowans, and they were from New York. So these people said in the meeting, we don't want these carpetbaggers. I'm like, is this 1864? What the hell? Carpetbaggers? That's people from the north that moved south. Sorry, Glenn. And you know, they're too whatever. And I'm just listening to this, and a 20-some-odd-year-old me said, well, they're not going anywhere because they're the owners of companies. I said, but in industry, you're going to have to wait for someone to retire, wait for someone to be fired, wait for them to perhaps wake up and realize that the world is changing around them, or wait for them to die. So I say on a regular basis to leaders, I'm like, which one are you going to be? I say, because the groups the people we're working with, they're getting younger and younger. Their expectations are changing. I said, I don't want to be the guy that they say, gosh, I'm so glad Elliott is finally out of there, or thank God he retired, thank God, you know, I'm sorry he died, but maybe we'll move in a different direction. So the message is the 20-some-odd-year-old me was like, these people are never going to change. So now I go back to visit my mom once a month. I see the change. It's been 30 plus years, you can imagine. They're gone to see their maker. And the city has changed. I mean, still some of it, but you see the change. And I think that what I say to leaders today is that what do you want to be as your legacy, to leave as your legacy as you move forward? The person that remains stale, or the person that's making changes that are positive and that people actually are appreciative of what you're doing? Now, not everyone's going to appreciate what you do. In Palm Beach, I can imagine, as Jorge is going to be more, and his team is going to be more successful at bringing people to all 39 cities, there are going to be people that have moved here that says, all these visitors, all this traffic, all of this blah, 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 we don't want it. And I'm like, well, you know, you can't have it all, and that's important. The key thing, one of the things that really resonated with this slide is as we talk about this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, if all else fails, I'd like to think that individuals that are listening to me, listening to folks that are on TV, and they're saying, okay, once again, we're talking about this subject. Usually the people, it's like church, the people that need it the most are not here. But eventually someone will get this message. But this one resonates the most, because at the end of the day, it's economics. Because I'm an economic development organization. Yes, I'm talking about this subject because I have a passion for it, but at the end of the day, how many heads and beds, butts and seats am I bringing to DC, and what's the bottom line? And this is defining. You know, it ties into the companies that make diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority, how successful they are. And I mean, this is not just simply because of last year. One, if I were getting out of college today, you know, I tell people all the time, at this age, you think you're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you, if I ever go after a job. Well, guess what? Young people coming into an organization, they're doing the same thing. They're looking at the culture, they're looking at what I bring to the table, and they're figuring out whether or not they want to be a part of that culture. But this is very, very compelling in terms of what happens when you put diversity and make diversity a priority. What happens when you have the conversations that if your team can say to you, with all due respect, Elliott, you think this ad is good, but it would have been good for 2005. You know, I thought I was woke. You know, and that's what happens when you have folks around the table that are really, really paying attention, and you're really paying attention to who's helping to represent your community. Now, let's face it. You know, I did this conversation with a city not long ago, and I'm sorry, my battery died in my watch. I have no idea how much time I have. Okay. I did this with a community not long ago, and she called me and she says, Elliott, I've been listening to what you're saying. She says, my mayor says he doesn't want black people visiting. You know, the number one attraction we have is a Confederate statue in the middle of our city. Would you come talk to us? And I did, because I love a challenge. And as I said to them when I started off, I'm like, I want to help you guys, whether you think what I'm saying makes sense or not. I have nothing to lose, because I can hit end on that Zoom call and I'm done with you people. But, and I mean that respectfully, you people. But the reality is like, I am trying to get them to understand this, and they're saying to her, but we don't want this. We want to stay how we are. And I mean, that's the dynamic of what you have to deal with in some communities. I'm sure that does not exist here, but that is the reality. But this is compelling. After U.S. travel ended in March of last year, and I'm still chairman of compensation committee, so we still make a lot of key decisions. I got a call from a guy named Mike Gamble, who plays a defining role in this industry. And he said, Elliott, I am the company that focuses on bringing people, I place people in organizations, DMOs, hotels, et cetera, and I want to see more diversity. I'm tired of the same people. I'm tired of calling you. I'm like, don't stop calling me. But I'm tired of calling you because you're one of the few that represent diversity. We need help. We need to be more. We need to do more. And I want you to be the chairman of this organization that will focus solely on this and make sure that we are not just saying things anecdotally and giving people the warm fuzzies. And again, like church, they leave, and by Tuesday, they're back to sinning again. We want them to really absorb this and truly make changes. So I'm like, Mike, I'll do it under one condition: if we hire an executive director, because we cannot do this on the side and not have leadership that is paid to focus on this solely, because it's not going to work. I said, I don't have the time to do it. You don't have the time to do it. We need to have people in place. So the answer was yes. We hired someone. Then we went on this fundraising campaign and bringing new board members in. The board members are primarily white. And I don't say that in a negative way, simply because, as I said to them on the first meeting, I'm like, you guys run the organizations, for God's sakes. You're the CEO of this, CEO of that. And I was thinking, so you can start by looking at this component, but then you're also the people that hire individuals. So we need to have you on here. Christine Duffy, who's the CEO of Carnival Cruises, who's now the chair, who lives down the street here. Like, Christine, I need you on here. I need Roger Dow on here. I need industry organizations on here. We need to talk about this in a way that is positive and that is inclusive of all the needs of this industry. And then we came up with pillars in which we could work on towards making sure that this is a success. So, we're going to reach out to Jorge and say, look, we have these amazing apprentices that we've identified in Florida or in wherever USA, and we want you to have them come in because we want them to be a part of this industry. We want them to love this industry. They may not even be in school of hospitality, because I didn't know what it was when I was in school. I said, and the reality is that a lot of people that are of diverse backgrounds come into the industry, but within 5 years they're gone, because they don't see opportunity, they don't see people that look like them, they don't see women, they just don't see it. They don't feel like they're going to make a role for themselves that are beyond where they are. And our industry loves to talk about how diverse we are. I'm like, well, there's a pyramid. We're diverse here, and then as you get further up, it's not there. And I said, so that's the reality, and we got to deal with that. And I said, and as we focus on this, we've got to make sure we come up with ways to get folks to understand. And equally as much, my favorite thing to do is to leave a meeting and have people think about themselves, because we never think that they're talking about us. Again, I reference church. It's like, he's not talking about me. More than likely he is, you just don't know it. So how do we make sure that those folks that are on the board, when their teams see that they're on the board, aren't looking at this and saying, are you kidding? This person's on the board for Tourism Diversity Matters? They are not even remotely diverse. Because it's important that they understand, and it's important that we ask them to search themselves and understand what they need to learn in regards to this subject. I was just with a group of friends recently, and I told the story about I was on a call with CEOs, and I said to them, when you go home, ask your family, ask your kids, what do they think about you as a person? How woke are you? How engaged are you? How involved or how aware are you of what you're talking about as you shake your head and give the thumbs up and you smile and say, this is important? And, and I know how this goes. You're on a Zoom. People are multitasking, or they're not listening, or they don't think you're talking to them. So about 6 weeks later, I got a call from a CEO. He says, I was kind of embarrassed to call you, but I feel like I need to call you. I said, I listened to what you said, and, I thought about it, and I was kind of cynical because I knew that you weren't talking to me. And then one day I was sitting there with my kids and my grandkids, and as usual, they were all on their little computers. And he says, hey, do you guys think I'm racist? That's not what I asked him to say, but this is what he said to his kids and grandkids. And the kids said, oh, yeah, Granddad, you totally are. And it kept, and he was like, what? He says, yeah, you remember that comment you made about our housekeeper? And remember the thing you said about this? Remember? They just started rattling stuff off the top of their head without thinking, and this guy's mind was blown. And he thought about it. He said, I thought about it for about a week and a half before I called you because I had no idea you were talking about me. And he says, and I'm embarrassed. And he was emotional because he says, I thought I was doing all the right things, but I had no idea that these biases existed, which we all have them, which I told him, like, we all have biases. I said, but it's when you weaponize them. And what your kids are saying to you is that you are not, you may not be that guy who is the traditional classic person that is considered a racist, and you may not be technically a racist, as they said you were, because you asked them that, but you have views that are out of touch with where we are today. And you have views about people because of the color of their skin, the changing dynamic of that person, et cetera, but yet you work in an industry that represents all these individuals. So the challenge is now, dear friends that I'm with, because everybody has Latinx friends, is ask them those questions about, what's it like when you come here? How do you feel? What was it like growing up? But then you have to do the same. I had a boss once, and I went to we were together, worked with him for 10 years. And I started off as a sales manager, left as VP, so you automatically know where I was working. And we were talking one day, and I said, if I were at your house, he's 15 years older than me, and let's say you were 15 years old, would I be welcome? He said, no, you wouldn't be. And I said, and he was from South Georgia, so it didn't surprise me. I said, well, why not? He says, well, my grandparents were really racist, and my parents had some of those views, and it just was not a welcoming place for people that weren't white. And I'm like, well, thanks for sharing that. And we started having a conversation about that, and this is out of the blue after a couple of drinks, liquid courage. And then I started saying to him later, I said, well, it's funny you should say that, because then he went on, well, I'm not that way, and I've learned a lot, and Elliott, because of blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's great and all, but I said, I've worked for you for 10 years. You've been to my house 4 times for 4 different occasions. I said, I play golf, kinda, but not as much as others do. And I said, and I hear you guys on Monday when you come back. And you guys are together playing golf, and then you go to your house and you do these things, and sometimes you go over for a game. I said, not once have you invited me to your house. Not once. And then he turned beet red. He says, I'm so sorry, I never thought about it. I was like, I don't want to be invited now. I said, but I want you to understand from my perspective that as you say these things about how you were raised and the things you heard and how you're not like that, it's hard for me Monday after Monday to hear you guys talk about all the great things you did, and I'm a vice president too, and not once did you think about inviting me. I said, so it may not be why I perceive it, but it sure feels like it. And that was a defining moment in terms of our relationship changing. And it wasn't from the standpoint of embarrassing him, it was like 4 of us, but it was this, that was a defining moment. This is over 15 plus years ago. So take those same conversations and bring them to light today, and make sure that you focus on ways in which we all do better, and you're challenging people in a good way. Jorge's getting up, that means my time is coming to an end. The things in which I do at Destination DC, same thing. I'm like, okay, yes, I happen to be the guy who's been having this conversation, but I wonder how many of my people are poking holes in what I'm saying. So I formed a DEI task force internally. And I learned a lot about what they felt I wasn't doing. And it hurt, because I thought, I was doing all the right things. But as I'm challenging people, I had to challenge myself. And so we do surveys. We have, these people are empowered. We have 2 groups, Employee Action Committee, no VPs, giving us insight as to things we should work on, and now the DEI task force that focuses totally on what we should be doing differently than what we're doing now. And it's important that I share these things simply because I have to look internally and make sure that we're doing better as well as an organization. Then we created on our website a component that is tied to a diverse experience for people coming to Washington. Not all black people coming to Washington, D.C. want to go to the new African American Museum. People the international community is engaged and involved and interested in the Black experience in Washington, D.C. in the same way that we're engaged and involved. But you can't look at, when you're marketing and you're putting these things together that are tied to the Black experience in or the Native American experience in Florida, that is just for those that are of that background. So we have a section on our website in which we created, as we're looking at evolving, that is speaking specifically to the experience of coming to Washington, D.C. as a destination. And these are some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. And these are, again, some of the questions that I've asked, or some of the things in which we've always realized. For me, perception is reality. So if people have a perception of your destination, of your leadership, whether it's true or not, you need to work on that, because in some cases, that is your reality. We can't forget about this 6 months later and go on when things are better, hopefully, and we're not dealing with COVID. And then some of the other key things that we focus on as an organization. So with that, I say thank you very much. I look forward to spending more time listening to some of the other speakers. To my friend Jorge, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope this has been helpful to you folks. Thanks.